What is the relationship between faith and knowledge? What's the difference between saying, I know and I believe? One of the things that classical philosophy gave us was a distinction between belief and knowledge. In the Republic, Plato's discussion of the divided line makes distinctions like this. First, we start at the lowest level with belief, with things that we know from tradition and authority, things that we simply accept as conventions. And then we move up to seeing things as true for ourselves through personal experience. And then we move from there to logical reasoning, where we can prove things and not just experience them. And finally, we move up to the level of wisdom, where we not only prove it, but we understand the essence of what we see and what we prove. Now, Aristotle was more interested in the empirical realm, but both Plato and Aristotle agreed that for knowledge to be knowledge, it had to be certain. For a belief to count as knowledge, it had to be true. And if there is any doubt about the truth of that belief, then we have reason to doubt that it is actually knowledge. Thus, in the history of Western philosophy, knowledge implies certainty, the elimination of doubt. Now, this can lead in two different directions. Either we must posit a method in order to eliminate doubt, an explanatory filter of some kind, and this could be the filter of dialectic, like Plato wanted, or an empirical filter, like Aristotle, or the scientific method, with the goal of attaining certainty. Now, the problem is that that can become increasingly narrow. But the other route is to admit total skepticism, to doubt that we can have anything more than opinions. This is the route taken by early Greeks, by people like David Hume, by postmodern philosophy, the famous quotation of Richard Rorty, that truth is what your colleagues let you get away with. In any case, knowledge is either an arduous achievement or it is impossible to attain. And given these parameters, faith remains in the shadows of belief rather than in the sun of knowledge, because it's not certain. But is this the best way to think about knowledge? Perhaps not. It only seems to work for certain kinds of knowledge, but it struggles to account for our ordinary experiences. In ordinary life, we claim knowledge about all sorts of things. Must we have certainty in order to have knowledge? Let's problematize this conception of knowing by looking at a few thinkers who seek to expand our conception of knowledge and what's involved in acts of knowing. So first, philosopher Michael Polanyi, who argues that most of our knowledge is silent and unspoken, what he called tacit. The kind of knowledge that is involved in rational deliberations, or for that matter, the kind of knowledge that we can put into words, is really only the tip of the iceberg of what we really know. So Polanyi's major point is, we know more than we can tell. How do you ride a bike? How do you hit a golf ball? How do you read body language? How do you read a room? How do you sell someone on something? These are all forms of tacit knowledge, learned embodied skills that are difficult to write down or to pass easily from one person to another. And yet they are all primary ways that we navigate the world. They are also deeply tied to our embodied experience of the world in which we seek to make sense of our reality. So we need an understanding of knowing that includes this intuitive making sense of things. Philosopher Esther Meeks builds on Polanyi this way, defining knowledge as concrete action. Here's what she writes: knowledge is the responsible human struggle to rely on clues, to focus on a coherent pattern, and to submit to its reality. Struggle to rely on clues, to focus on a pattern, and submit to its reality. In other words, knowledge is more a matter of integration, making sense of what is unknown on the basis of subsidiary knowledge, clues, patterns, many of which are not easy to articulate. In everyday knowing, we begin with the clues we have, and we seek to make responsible judgments based on those clues. And as we see indications of various qualities, such as trustworthiness or adequacy to experience, those qualities become a pattern that illumines our further experience, and ultimately a pattern to which we must submit in our thoughts and in our behavior. In our acts of knowing, Meeks says, we shouldn't expect to achieve complete certainty without any possibility of doubt. Instead, we have confidence, the continued reassurance that our acts of knowing are getting us somewhere, leading us in the right direction. In our knowing, we should seek contact between our mind and reality and not correspondence, an exhaustive picture of reality. We never have 100% correspondence in any of our acts of knowing. Contact, not correspondence, is a more complete picture of what it means to know, especially if the thing we are trying to know is a person. Let me simply add to this the testimony of Ian McGilchrist, who is a British psychiatrist who studies the brain. He talks about belief in terms of the hemispheres of the brain. He writes that the right hemisphere has this perceptual awareness all of its own. It's creative, intuitive, emotional, imaginative, and much of this right-brained awareness happens prior to left-brain reasoning. Now, that is not to say that the right brain doesn't think. It does. But it does in a much more integrated, big-picture manner. McGilchrist argues that in our conception of knowing, we have neglected the right hemisphere, and that because the brain is so plastic, the links within the brain, if they're not strengthened, will weaken the imagination, and likewise our capacity to be creative and to respond intuitively to the environment. But I want to read for you what McGilchrist writes when he speaks about knowledge in relationship to the brain. He says this: since the left hemisphere is concerned with what is certain, with knowledge of the facts, its version of belief is that it is just the absence of certainty. If the facts were certain, according to its view, I should be able to say, I know that instead. This view of belief comes from the left hemisphere's disposition towards the world. So belief is just a feeble form of knowing as far as it is concerned. But belief in terms of the right hemisphere is different, because the disposition towards the world is different. The right hemisphere does not know anything in the sense of certain knowledge. For it, belief is a matter of care. It describes a relationship where there is a calling and an answering, the root concept of responsibility. In other words, to say, I believe in you, is not a statement about the facts about you. It is a statement of my posture towards you. See, it makes all the difference in the world whether you are trying to be certain of a list of facts and whether you are getting to know a particular person. Now, which one does faith resemble? And is it reasonable to expect certainty if coming to faith is much more like getting to know a person?